Welcome to a special edition of Cooperative Vermont. Yesterday, the Lafayette Federal Credit Union, which had its annual meeting and election, and a group of pro-democracy advocates have been running a campaign there to really open up the process. So I have with me Dan Robinson on the line. He is a member of Lafayette and was involved in the campaign. He was at the meeting yesterday. Dan, welcome.
Thank you. Well, nice to be here.
So, do you want to start off a little bit by giving some context to the organizing that culminated in the meeting yesterday?
Sure. I live in Tacoma Park, and we started a couple of years ago an effort to try to get a credit union branch here in Tacoma Park, or even better, to start a credit union. But we ran into many hurdles because the state of credit unions is not what it once was, and in fact there hasn't been one started in Maryland for about 30 years. We interviewed a number of local credit unions and in an attempt to lure them here, and ran into some difficulties over time, but had a good local response. We had a survey with about 275 respondents who were very interested in moving their money from a bank credit into a credit union. So we got some momentum going, and then we were lucky enough to come into contact with a group in Washington, D.C., and they took a slightly different tack, one of getting folks onto the board of a local credit union. And after some of their own research, they determined that Lafayette Federal Credit Union was a good candidate to try to run for the board. And two members of that group, and we're kind of, I guess, in the process of merging our Tacoma Park, Maryland group and the DC group, and that merged group is well, it's still a little bit in process, but the working title is DMV, like District Maryland Virginia for CUD, Credit Union Democracy. In any case, David and Chris decided to run for the board of Lafayette Federal Credit Union, David Zuckerman and Chris Boner. And to do that, we needed to circulate petitions, and that was quite a task. Lafayette wasn't interested in giving us access to their membership list. So we stood outside of a number of branches collecting petition signatures, and were able to get enough petition signatures. I think our total was something over 200. Up against some odds, we were evicted from various credit union branches and not welcomed in any kind of way. And this was all a build-up to the annual meeting for Lafayette, which occurred yesterday. And so there was a good bit of anticipation of how that would go. The hope was that Chris and David, or both, would get onto the board, but we knew it would be a slog, even though they were on the ballot. And this was a much better attended annual meeting than they'd had for many years, if ever. There were about 300 people in the room. They allow at Lafayette non-person entities to vote, and people who represent more than one account, or accounts that, I'm a little unclear on this, corporate accounts. Anyway, in any case, they could have multiple voting blocks, and so they had little paddles with a number of votes that were available to them on each for their block. And those non-person accounts represented some percentage. We couldn't get numbers, but maybe 100 of the or maybe 50 of the 400 or so votes that were cast, somewhere between 50 and 100 of the 400 votes that were cast, came from these corporate blocks. So that was a concern. In any case, we stood in line to make comments after the business was the old business was over, the new business started, and part of that was an open hearing from members, which was good. We started by asking for a minute for each of the candidates for them to make a statement. Well, that was roundly defeated. And then comments started, and we exercised democracy in the annual meeting to a large degree, and a kind of an exciting and spectacular way, and to my mind, and a stunning to them. I think it was a way that was stunning to the folks at Lafayette. They didn't know what to make of us all. 100 people in the room who were trying to bring democracy to a credit union. One by one, we came up and asked difficult questions. What was the nature of this corporate entity? Could one corporation have more than one vote? Was it trust funds? Could one person have more than one vote? The answers were not encouraging. Yes, one person could have more than one vote if they had more than one entity, more than one account. Had they, I can name some of the names of us. Emily Townsend got up and asked for electronic voting. Well, they said no, they've considered that in the past and it was prohibitively expensive. End of statement. I got up later and said, well, what exactly do you mean by prohibitively? Well, can you put some numbers? No, we don't remember the numbers. It went on and on. This is at a country club. You can't get there unless you have a car. There's a dress code. Can we have it someplace where there's no dress code and you can get somewhere near a metro? Well, we get the country club for free. We couldn't possibly accommodate another place. Well, it was quite a meeting. It went on for several hours, and I think they're used to half-hour meetings. In the end, David and Chris did not win, but they got 90 votes roughly each. The incumbents got 270 votes or so each. But any group that comes up with 30% of the vote has to be taken seriously, at least in a normally functioning democracy. And in the end, we were taken seriously. After the meeting, we were approached by upper management, and they were cordial and trying to find a way to be inclusive, because they knew that they had something on their hands that was going to shake their institution, and their institution, I believe, has been shaken. So the story's not over, though we didn't win the election. The story is by no means over, and we in Tacoma Park are hopeful that we can get Lafayette to either open a branch or a deposit-taking ATM or some mix of those things. So that's the story in a nutshell.
So one question I had was, in Tacoma Park, I know I'd heard at least some of you guys had been involved with the food cooperative there. Were people kind of coming to the credit union meeting, having experienced the kind of cooperative democracy at the food co-op, and was there kind of, for people who are involved with that, was there sort of a noticeable difference?
Well, I've been on the board. I was on the board of the food co-op, and Emily is on the board, and David Zuckerman is on the board of the food co-op. So we were well represented. The food co-op was well represented, but not as the food co-op. We were there as individuals. The food co-op is a SEG, or a special employee group, special something. I can't remember what the E stands for.
Yes, a select employee group.
Select employee. Thank you. A select employee group. We tried to get interest in the co-op to get people to come, and some did, but there wasn't the connection that we had hoped, to make the connection between a food co-op and a credit union. Although that's a very potent combination, and in fact, the food co-op, TPSS Food Co-op, which is in the midst of an expansion effort, has Lafayette in mind and is trying to find a way, as it expands, to make a space for a credit union, and we'll work that angle as well. But the connection between the food co-op and the credit unions isn't very strong yet. That's something we're working on.
And what do you kind of see coming out of this? Are there any particular kind of next steps you guys are going to be taking? And what was were there specific the platform you were putting forward? Were there specific pieces that you felt were heard at the meeting?
Yes, we took some, because there was no videography allowed at all inside the meeting, or even in the parking lot of the country club. We tried to come up with some way to capture the experience on video. And in fact, we have about 20 minutes of video on the way there in the car and on the way back, and a little bit in the parking lot from some folks who were there. So we'll see if we can't craft that into something that has some potency. The platform itself is evolving, but some specific points were made. A couple I've mentioned. One is having an accessible meeting place. Another is to have electronic voting. As far as we could tell, about 1% of people vote at the credit union, and there are examples of other credit unions that go to electronic voting that have significant increases in the percentage of people who are voting. I'm trying to think of other things. Oh, an important one is to make public the salaries of the top five staff people at the co-op. That was recommended. It was suggested. Everything that we did, except for the first vote to allow candidates each a minute, everything was voted down. No, that's not true. That was voted down. The rest of the things that we made motions on were deemed to be advisory, and a number of them were accepted. The one to make public the salaries of the top 5 employees did not pass. So that's certainly part of our platform, and it's part of what we're working towards. The call to study a meeting place within a half a mile of a metro, public transportation, was accepted, so they will consider that. Trying to think of all the rest. We're in a debrief period, and we haven't really gone through the motions that were made point by point. We didn't have those motions in place. Some were ad hoc, some were written down and accepted, and the parliamentarian at Lafayette he put in a long day because there was such tension in the room, particularly in the beginning, that motions were made, and then there was discussion, and then motions were made to cancel, to stop discussion, and then there was discussion on that, and then the thing went on and on. People were starting to, those who aren't comfortable with democratic processes were starting to tear their hair out. Too bad for them. These things do take time, and progress does take time. In any case, to answer your question, we have quite a lot on our plate. This process is by no means over. Lafayette is fully aware that we have things to say and work to do, and I hope that they'll work with us.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to share the outlines of what happened, and I think that this is an important and interesting initiative, and we'll be interested to hear kind of what comes out of that debrief process as time goes on.
Right. Good. Well, I'm so glad that you arranged this, and I'm very happy to report out, and there is more to come.
All right. Thank you much.
Take care, man.